Hey guys, this is Tyler Jackson, the owner and publisher of PlaySheetSports.com. We've got another great episode of the Playsheet Sports podcast for you today. I'm joined again by Rusty Udy, a veteran sports writer. We talk about the Class Quad A regional results and the 8 teams that are making it to the state tournament on that side. Then we go ahead and we preview some of the other regional matchups between the girls, which will all be finalized by Thursday evening. And then we move on to the boys' side, talk about some of the regional seedings there and some of the controversies surrounding those and the tournaments and how we expect them to play out. Afterwards, we cap the show by talking about some of our favorite state tournament memories, whether it be on the girls' side or the boys' side, and some of the top games that we've experienced. But first, I want to thank our sponsors for this week's episode, Raynell Medical Center and Princeton Healthcare Center. You can learn more about both of those sponsors by visiting our website at playsheetsports.com.
For the past 4 decades, Princeton Healthcare Center has provided a quality experience for countless families to give them a warm and safe senior living environment. We're much more than a nursing home, offering skilled nursing services in a long-term care community. If you're looking for a skilled nursing facility that is as compassionate as it is comprehensive, look no further. Contact us today to schedule a tour for you or your loved one. Princeton Healthcare Center, a commitment to caring.
I want to welcome you to the Play Sheet Sports broadcast presented by Princeton Community Care Center and Raynell Medical Center. I am joined today by Rusty Udy. Rusty, sports writer in the area for the last couple of years. This is the second time in 4 episodes that you've been on our podcast here. Obviously, a wealth of knowledge to explain, to share with us. And, you've been out and about, but we have finally reached postseason time here at basketball season. We just got these seedings for the Quad A Girls State Tournament. Those games just finished up a few moments ago. We're recording this on Tuesday evening. And we also have the regional seedings on the boys' side. A lot to talk about all around. A lot of points of irritation for several schools. But before we get into all of that, Rusty, how are you doing today?
Doing good. It's always a fun time of year. It's unpredictable time of year, so we'll see what how it plays out. But so far, the ones that should win are kind of holding serve right now. I mean that you could make an argument for University and Wheeling Park tonight, but we saw University earlier in the year, and they're really good. So not a big surprise that they beat Wheeling Park tonight. A little surprising they hammered them like they did, but it wasn't surprising that they won.
Yeah, it's before we really get into the results of Quad A, I think it's going to be interesting because Wheeling Park, Alexis Bordas, we've talked about her the last couple of years. She's the two-time reigning Mary Ostrowski, that's girls basketball state player of the year winner. And I wonder if that conversation shifts any now that Wheeling Park is not in the in the state tournament. I would imagine it probably doesn't take too much of a hit, especially when you consider that team how battered they were. And we've had player of the years like Calissa Lacey, for example, the year that she won it. I actually don't think that they made the state tournament. And that was I think in 2020 or so. So it's
Right.
not too irregular for that to happen, but that really is interesting. But they kind of came into the season. They lost. They graduated 2 starters, I think. They lost one to Wheeling Central, and then Lala Woods, who was a first team All-Stater and I think a Division I point guard as well. She tore her ACL in the summer, so they lost her. So it was really down the Bordas. But yeah, just kind of going over the seeds real quick. Number one, I'll go down 1 to 8. Number one, Spring Valley. Number two, Morgantown. Number three, Parkersburg. Number four, University. Number five, St. Albans. Number six, George Washington. At 7 is Washington, and at 8 is Spring Mills. The two Region 3 games that we had were St. Albans, Oak Hill at St. Albans, and Beckley at GW. And man, they were both really good games. Didn't get a chance to see any of the Beckley one, but Beckley had a lead there, I think, after 3 quarters. And Jariah Pryor, a kid I believe she's a sophomore and had gotten an offer from Marshall last year as a freshman. She went off. I think she had at least 14 points in the fourth quarter, just according to some reports I've seen on social media. And but I wasn't really surprised by that game and that it was close because those Beckley GW games are always close. They're always competitive. So it wasn't really a shocker. Oak Hill, that's a game that I was a little surprised that Oak Hill was in it as much as what they were. They struggled at times this year, But they really had a chance to win that game. I think you mentioned that Tasia Gray got in a little bit of foul trouble there, but even if you don't win that game, if you're Oak Hill, you're probably looking at that and thinking, man, like this is a really good step forward for our program. And one thing that we've done throughout this year is we've taken some of the boxes on the middle school side for Oak Hill, and they have some really good players coming in and some good returning players as well. So I think that even if you're Beckley and you're Oak Hill, there are a lot of positives to take away from tonight.
Yeah, I mean, as far as Oak Hill goes, I mean, they were really finished the season well. I think they were like six wins out of seven. Only loss was to Wyoming East, which Wyoming East just had a Wyoming East night against them that night, and it was tough. But I mean, they really. When I talked to Coach Compton after the game, he was, he felt like his team could go to St. Albans and win. I mean, he really believed that, and thought it was a pretty good matchup for them. And from the first time they played them, and yeah, I mean, he was right. I mean, they played really well. They really had to battle some foul trouble in the first half. Isaacs, I think, had three, and I think Parsons got three. And then when Tasia Gray got her fourth in the third, I believe it was, and then she wound up fouling out with about 4 minutes to go in the game. That really kind of changed the dynamics of it a little bit. There was I'm pretty sure it was a 1 point game at that point, and Oak Hill really struggled to score from that point on, and they've struggled all year in the third quarter. They struggled again tonight in the third quarter. Had a 7 point lead, and I think they led by as many as 13 in the first half. So they were playing well. They were doing what they wanted to do, but just couldn't quite hold on there. But yeah, I agree. I mean, we go back. I think they've got double-digit wins the last 2 years, but you go back before that, and it was pretty thin for Oak Hill. I mean, they really struggled, and had some tough years, and couldn't pick up many wins at all. And now they've got a lot of positive vibes going on over there. This kind of senior group has kind of turned things around a little bit. They do have a lot of kids coming back, and I think they're going to be pretty solid going forward. So, it's unfortunate. I mean, it was definitely a game they could have won, but it's always tough when you go on the road in the postseason to win, especially in the fourth quarter. That's when the games kind of get separated just a little bit, and kind of happened with Beckley tonight, and it kind of happened with Oak Hill. The fourth quarter was kind of the difference maker.
Yeah, it's but like we said, I do think that there's a lot to build on there. Beckley has some good young pieces. We talked about Zoe Williams all year
Right, right.
long. Stepped in and at spurts, I would say was probably the best player on the team, and they've had some really good players with Abby Dillon. Uh, but I think that's something that at least you have a building block to build around there. And then, like we said, with Oak Hill, Coach Compton's really been trying to steer that program in the right direction. And I think that even though they're not going to be in Charleston next week, there's just so many positives to take away
Right.
from this and to be that close because that wasn't the case for years, where they were playing for a sectional or regional championship, and I think that some of the realignment has helped with it a little bit, but to be competitive in that game, the kids now believe like, hey, like we were that close, like that's
Right.
something
Yeah.
to work towards in the off
Yeah,
season.
and like you said earlier, I mean, we don't know what the seedings. I mean, the classifications are going to be next year. I mean, O'Keel could be down in AAA next year. It's hard to say.
Yeah. Well, if they are, because I've already gotten this complaint on the boys' side, they better hope that they redo the regions because I don't think they can fit anymore. They've already got 9 teams in that region.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, I mean, we've already talked about it. There's like three teams that definitely could be booted out of there and probably don't belong in there. And
mhm.
nothing against those teams. It's just geographically. I mean, that region.
Ripley doesn't belong in the Southern
Right. We got Ripley and Hoover. Hoover's kind of a fringe team, and then Sissonville. Those are all fringe teams that probably need to be over more with Nitro and teams like that.
Absolutely. We have some other girls regionals this week. Wednesday, we have, I think it's double A and single A.
Double A, single A. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Greenbrier West and Greater Beckley will play, and I believe Riverview and
Webster County.
Webster County. Yeah. So
Yep,
Riverview,
Webster.
Webster, yeah, and Webster has had a pretty decent season. Greenbrier West, and on double A side, we have Mingo Central going to Wyoming East, and then we have Summers County going to James Monroe. That is some interesting ones all around. I would imagine I kind of believe that the home teams are pretty well favored in all those games. I think the one that could be the most interesting to me is probably Summers County James Monroe. And the reason I say that is because whenever Summers County played over there earlier in the year, I think it was like a 5 point game in the fourth quarter. I
Right.
had coverage of that one. And I think that's a lot of it. If you're Summers County, you probably feel better about that matchup than what you do about going to Wyoming East, just because Wyoming East puts so much pressure on your guards, and Summers County just doesn't have the personnel to deal with that.
Right.
Meanwhile, James Monroe could do the same thing, but it's not to the same sort of level that what Wyoming East will do necessarily, where they'll they have so many different guards, they jump all these different things, and at least with James Monroe you can feel a little bit different. I think probably a good example of this is Summers County when they get pressure, they get full court man. They like to use their bigs to try to get the ball up the court, so that
Right.
way you can't get them, and that's what they did with Wyoming East.
Right.
Now, what Wyoming East does really well is they had Maddie Clark and they have Abby Baker, who okay, like we feel like we can have this kid guarding your center up and down the court, so it's not that much of a mismatch. And you know, if you have Abby Persinger and you're putting a center on her all the way up, you probably like your ability to get the ball up the court. So I'd imagine that's probably what Summers will try to do to try to get into a half court game, maybe slow it down a little bit. But yeah, I think we've got some really good games on tap for that. And then on Thursday we have Nicholas County at Greenbrier East and Princeton at Sissonville, all for some spots in the state tournament next week.
Yeah.
Do any of these games really stand out to you? Pop off whenever you kind of look and go down through the brackets?
I think the Riverview Webster's game is going to be interesting, just in the fact of Riverview's really kind of carrying a chip on their shoulder. They felt like they should have been the 2 seed playing at home. They've got to travel all the way to Upper Glade now from Bradshaw, which they may be a 2 day trip to get there.
Yeah,
It's incredible. So, but they're a little upset in the fact that they felt like they earned the 2 seed. I mean, they did play a tough schedule. I'll give them that. Webster County's record is not really. I think they're right around 500, so it's not like it's a huge disparity as far as that goes. So, I'll be interesting to see how that goes. I think that might be the one interesting, one maybe lower seed that might, knock off the higher seed. But it's you always, Summers County always seems to find a way in the postseason, and so that one's going to be interesting to see how they, try to attack James Monroe and how James Monroe can respond. But right now, James Monroe looks pretty solid, and I would be surprised if Summers wins, but they definitely have the capability.
absolutely. And I think that on the Wyoming East Bingo Central game, that's just a tough game for Bingo Central. They just don't have another guard that's capable of taking the pressure off of Addie Smith, and that's been the issue whenever they've played Wyoming East throughout her careers. They
Yeah,
need that secondary player that can take the ball out of her hands and get her some free looks, and
yeah,
that's just not where they at with roster construction. And they've been pretty transparent with that, just trying to find somebody, but they can't. And so
yeah.
unless she's able to get loose and have an unreal game, I think that makes things extremely difficult for them as far as advancing. You mentioned Webster's schedule. I do agree with that. I think the game that kind of raised my eyebrow, and this is obviously 2 months ago at this point, but at the Winter Classic, they did beat Independence 37-22. But the rest of the schedule does kind of lend itself to that mentality where you look up and down it and you're not overly impressed. So, I do have to walk that back a little bit. Riverview probably does have a really good shot there with everything that they've done and just the competition they played. And I think it'd be a nice little story for that community with what they're going through with the flood damages. I know
Right.
they couldn't play their regional game at home. They actually had to play it up at West Side High School.
Yeah.
So I think that'd be good, a nice little opportunity, to clear their heads a little bit, get to go back up there, and they've made a tradition out of it the last, I'd say almost 10 years, about 8 years or so of getting
Right.
up there and consistently playing on those first couple days of the state tournament.
Yeah, it's interesting too because that's why they played that Winter Classic. Gary's talked to me a little bit about it. It's like a state tournament prep. they go up there, they stay, they get used to playing one day and having to have gaps and not play for a day or so, and get used to kind of that strange environment that sometimes the state tournament provides. And so they're always looking towards Charleston, even from the very beginning of the season. So, I mean, they rolled into Greenbrier West last year, and quite honestly, I doubt, and I don't even think, really Gary maybe gave them a chance. I mean, but and they rolled in and beat Greenbrier West, who was heavily favored. So, they just seem to know how to get to Charleston.
Yeah, it should be a lot of fun, and especially once we get up there to single A to kind of see how it all shakes out. Do you have any final thoughts on the girls side of things before we move over to the boys and talk about all that?
No, I think it's just going to be interesting because I think Wyoming East, they always seem to find that postseason gear. And the last couple times they've played, especially against Oak Hill. I mean, when I watched them play Oak Hill that night, I was like, Oak Hill's not a bad basketball team, and they just pretty much annihilated them. And I'm like, that looks like the postseason Wyoming East Warriors that I've seen the last few years. And so, I mean, there's probably going to go into the state tournament with a chip on their shoulder. I mean, they're the two-time defending state champions, but I'm not sure they're getting a lot of love. I mean, there's some teams that, probably are maybe how you would feel a little disrespecting them just a little bit. And we kind of know how that plays out in Wyoming County when teams down there get disrespected. They seem to rise to the occasion.
Absolutely. Should they get there, I think that they will be seeded as the 4 seed. Unless something absolutely crazy happens, I think the two teams, two of the three, Williamstown, St. Mary's, and then Wheeling Central. I think Wheeling Central will probably be the 1 seed, as they should be. I think they've earned it. And then whoever gets there out of those other two will be the 2 seed. And I think the 3 seed will probably end up being Charleston Catholic. And then the 4 seed, I think, is either going to be Logan or Wyoming East, just depending on how the coaches look at it. Wyoming East has the 24-point win at their place. Logan has the most recent win by a possession or two at their place. So either way, and I really don't think it matters when you're in the 4 or 5 matchup because your path remains the same. All it is just what color jersey are you wearing?
Right.
That's literally
Double A is
the
going to be tough. I mean, you can kind of see it falling out different ways. With James Monroe head of Wyoming East and Wyoming East on the other side. I mean, you can see it now, and don't necessarily mean that's the way it's going to be, but the top six is going to be just brutal.
Yeah. And this is what I've always talked about, the utility of the coaches poll, because I've tried to gauge that and just projecting my seating if this falls that way. And I would imagine that Wyoming East is probably going to be seated ahead of James Monroe. But it is interesting if they're not. I like I said, either way, I don't think it matters because if you're if you're any of those seeds outside of the 1 seed, maybe the 2 seed as well. So if you're any of those seeds outside the one or the two, you're in for tough sledding, no matter what game you're
Exactly.
playing. And then
Yeah,
after that, it's all bets off. Semifinals. I think all those teams that are going to make it there are going to be capable of winning a title. And obviously,
absolutely.
you don't play easy games. And that's always been the thing with double A girls over the last couple of years is that I feel like the top two have always been above everybody else. You go back to 2021 when wherever Wyoming East, kind of renaissance started. It was them and Parkersburg Catholic for 2 years and then everybody else. And then it was Wyoming East, 15 points better than Summers. And then last year it was them and Williamstown. Wheeling Central, I think, was kind of right there.
Right.
They were kind of more like the 1B tier. But now, like it genuinely, I think that there are probably 5 or 6 teams that could win this thing, and I
Absolutely.
think it's just incredibly important to try to lock up those 1 or 2 seeds. But a lot of that's kind of already been decided.
Yeah. It's gonna be interesting. It'll be a lot of fun if everybody gets there that we think will get there. Sometimes you get caught peeking down the road and some strange things can happen.
Absolutely. Like we said, it should be a lot of fun, but just want to go ahead and take a moment to acknowledge one of our sponsors, Raynell Medical Center. Excellent health care right at home. They offer all kinds of great services. They serve portions of Fayette, Greenbrier, Nicholas, and Summers County, offering a bunch of health-based services, yeah, pharmaceutical services, dental services, healthcare, almost anything you could ask for. They have community outreach, they have health education. They're located in various schools throughout the area, so make sure to check them out. You can find what services they have at communityhealthcenter.net. Once again, that's communityhealthcenter.net. Rainell Medical Center, excellent healthcare right at home. So I want to go ahead and move on to the boys' side of things. The regional seedings came out, and we knew that this was going to cause a fuss no matter what way it went. I want to start off with Class AA, Region 3, and I will go ahead and kind of start this off with my thoughts on it. Uh, I talked to Kelly Mann at James Monroe, and I understand why the Wyoming East game didn't get played. Kelly's kind of old school. He believes in honoring those commitments that were made, and that's not to say that the other coaches don't. But for those unfamiliar, what had happened is Wyoming East and James Monroe were supposed to play a game, not last Thursday, but the Thursday before, and they got snowed out, so they rescheduled it to Friday. So that got snowed out as well because Monroe County's administration, they do pull the trigger early. I think they had a bus issue a couple years ago, and because of that, they do get a little bit skittish. They tend to err on the safe side of caution. I can't disagree with that. But the game was offered to be rescheduled on Saturday. Now, here's where it comes in. A bunch of other games would have had to be moved around. Wyoming East was scheduled to play Bluefield on Saturday, and they would have had to move that game to another day. And there were some other ones. It was offered to play the game on Monday, and that was James Monroe turned that down because they had a game against Midland Trail already. And then supposedly I had heard from another coach in the area that Midland Trail, a lot of teams were on board to move games around in order to get the James Monroe Wyoming East game played. And I understand that. And Kelly's line of thinking is more so, I'm not going to. And one of the coaches that he played had told me, it was Jared Robertson from Greenbrier West. He told me, I appreciated him not moving those games around because he played them on Tuesday and that game would have been impacted. He said, I appreciated him not moving those games around. And Kelly had said, a lot of these schools, these were two road games, at Midland Trail, at Greenbrier West, you're getting into senior night. So I'm asking them to cancel. He said, I just think that I should hold those commitments that I've already made. And it's not like we didn't already try to reschedule this game a couple times. It just didn't happen. So what that does is it takes everything out of it. James Monroe doesn't really get a chance to sweep Wyoming East, but they do still finish with the best record in the region. I think they were 10-1 when the votes were due, or 11-1 after the trail game. And the way the region shook out was West Side got the number one seed. They split with James Monroe. They were James Monroe's only in-region loss. Wyoming East got the two seed, and James Monroe got the three seed, which meant that when it comes to the regional championship games, the Wyoming County schools will be hosting. The last time that we did this podcast together, I said that I believe that the Wyoming County schools were the most talented. And I do. That's no offense to James Monroe. And it doesn't mean that the most talented teams always win. I probably go back to, and staying in Monroe County. I think it was 1992 whenever I believe they lost to Herndon in the state semifinal game. And I mean, most people would say that it's funny that the game I'm getting ready to reference actually, is between a Monroe County and a Wyoming County school. But if I've heard the story correctly, Birch was supposed to be, or somebody was supposed to be the best team in the region that year, or single A, and Peterstown was right there with them, and they got upset. Yeah, it was 1992. So they got upset, and Peterstown kind of took their matchup with Herndon lightly, and I believe they actually lost. They did lose to Herndon, and Herndon. A lot of people say, hey, we were 20 points better than Herndon.
Yeah.
We had Kelly. Kelly was a player on that team, I believe, and they had Travis Jackson, who was going to Virginia Tech, a big 6'8" center, and they lost that
Kind of
game.
a Cinderella story is the last year Herndon was
Yeah.
in existence. And yeah,
Exactly. But my point of the story is that the most talented team isn't the one that always wins. So the way I would have seeded things, I would have went West Side one because they did end up splitting in the region. And everything that goes into it, they did split with James Monroe, and the the Wyoming East game not getting played kind of factors in. But I believe West Side was 6-2 in the region. And truthfully, I do value those wins outside of the region, splitting with Logan, beating Chapmanville, beating Shady Spring. I I think those victories are too significant to ignore, even though I know they're not supposed to matter that much. but I think West Side did enough to earn the 1 seed, and I don't think that Monroe County folks would argue too much about that. I would have seeded James Monroe too, just because, hearing Kelly's side of things, I do understand that. I don't really think that they're necessarily ducking them. But I also understand like why the folks on the eastern side of Wyoming County feel the way they do. So I would have seeded James Monroe 2, and I would have seeded Wyoming East 3. Just because I feel like James Monroe, their schedule, I feel like their schedule did pale in comparison to the Wyoming County schools. But you play the schedule you did, you beat them, you had a pretty impressive in-region record. So, and I covered that James Monroe Wyoming East game, and I thought that it could have gone either way. It was one of those weird games from James Monroe where they got 30 plus points from their bench, and they have kids capable of that. But I would have seeded it. I put up Wyoming East at 3. But I understand that the way things are, and there were a lot of coaches that didn't really feel good about the fact that that game wasn't made up.
The my whole thing with it is that probably, well, the first thing is there is no criteria.
Hmm.
Okay, we all make up this criteria as to think. Okay, well, we feel like the regional wins are the first criteria, and this it falls some other way after that. Well, there is no criteria. Okay, and how people think, as we've seen throughout a lot of different situations over the years, everybody thinks differently. Okay. And some emphasize regional wins, some emphasize head to head, others emphasize other things. So my belief in the situation was that even under an unusual circumstances that they were, James Monroe needed to play that game. They needed that win in order, probably would have given them the number 1 seed, even with everything that Westside did. Only losing one time in the region and being the only team that won a road game of significance in the region probably would have put them at the top seed. And I think a lot of the problem is that people, especially the coaches and even sports writers, nobody could figure out how to distinguish it. It's like, what do we point to say, okay, that's definitely it. And then we started having to look at, okay, well, look at Westside, what they did. They won this game, that game, that game, that game. Well, as it turned out, probably Wyoming East made their own case to say, okay, we are the number 2 by going to Willie Acres Arena and winning, which Westside didn't do.
Hmm.
So, even though it was after the fact, it's almost like it's kind of played out to, okay, by the schedule, this is probably the way it should be. But again, you could sit here and argue the other direction. James Monroe did the things they were supposed to do. They played everybody in the region pretty much. They had probably the most regional games of any of the of all the schools. So they did what they were supposed to do. But when you get into voting, it's just tough. You got things that people look at that, like what I may look at as the biggest factor, you don't look at as the biggest factor. And doesn't make me right, doesn't make you right, but that's just the way we look at it. And I just felt like James Monroe needed that game, that one way or the other, they could have proven their position.
Hmm.
And so that was my point through the whole thing. I understand moving games, but this has been such a weird year with how we distinguish these teams that you need an edge of some sort. And when you look at James Monroe's schedule, it didn't give them an edge. You look at Wyoming East and West Side schedule, it did give them an edge, in some people's minds. So that's where it gets to be tricky. And that was my only point through the situation. Um, I still think it's impossible that even with the way it's played out to say definitively it's 1, 2, 3. I
Hmm.
mean, there's arguments that you can just sit there and build up to prove everybody's in the one slot of those 3 teams. So, I mean, I think for the most part, it's played out to prove that the seating is right. But again, if we were playing on neutral floors, we wouldn't have to worry about this because all we'd be arguing about is jersey colors. You know?
Yeah.
So, I mean, granted, Westside has kind of, put themselves in the more idealistic position on paper. You just hit a huge nail with there are no givens in the postseason. And just when you think that maybe the winner of Midland Trail and Liberty cannot go to Wyoming or cannot go to West Side and win. That's not that's not right. And I've even been told that West Side does not like the matchup with Liberty. It's a bad matchup for them. Both of those games have been close, so nothing's a given. But you would rather play Liberty or Midland Trail than you would James Monroe or Wyoming East. That's just a fact. And so they are in a better position there.
And the folks from west side of Wyoming County probably understand that more than anything. Just all I have to say is Gilbert, and
Right.
that'll bring back a ton of memories of
Right.
being in that
Right.
position where you're heavily favored. But so I did find it. So now keep in mind in 1992 they did not actually seed teams. It was predetermined that there were 8 regions at the time.
Predetermined regions.
Yeah, it was
How you matched up.
predetermined already. So
Yep.
Birch and Peterstown probably would have been the top 2 seeds, and Birch was actually upset and in the first round by Franklin, and Peterstown had kind of assumed, okay, like we're gonna
That
be
game went to
clear.
overtime, maybe a couple overtimes. Franklin and Birch, I think.
I don't see overtime on here, but it's
Overtime, okay. Because
possible.
they did battle in one crazy overtime one year because that was a stretch where Birch was really good for about 3 or 4 years. Coach Smith actually coached Birch at that time. That's the assistant at Wyoming East. I mean, at
Mingo
Central.
Central.
Mingo
Yeah.
Central. Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, they beat Birch and Peterstown. Matt Savage, the head coach at James Monroe, for a couple years that won 2 titles there in 2022 and 23, told me the story. But they had assumed that they were going to cakewalk to a state championship, and they lost 57-55 to Herndon in the semifinals. And then Herndon lost to Franklin by 16 points in the state championship game.
Yeah. Magic ran out.
Yeah.
Magic ran out.
But there's just but it is kind of funny, like that's the example that I'm using, and it involves a Monroe County school that it consolidated and
Exactly.
a Wyoming
Yeah.
County school that consolidated. So it's like that history, and the two, like Herndon's part of Wyoming East now, and Peterstown's part of James Monroe. So kind of the two schools that are in direct conflict here. But yeah, I agree with you, and it's interesting because the 2 seeds that come from Region 3, I imagine will be the 3 and the 4 seed. Wyoming East, I think was 6 or so in the last coaches poll, and they beat Logan, who was I think was number 5, and then West Side.
Yeah. Logan was like they were in the wrong spot. I
Yeah,
don't know how the Tug Valley game went tonight, but Logan's kind of been limping into the postseason just a little bit. And when we were looking at that game, you look on the WVSSAC or when they played Shady. You look on the WVSSAC, it had Wheeling Central, Logan beating Wheeling Central, which
mhm.
they didn't. And so I don't know if some coaches looked at that and didn't understand that it was listed wrong. I don't know, but Logan, had a stretch there where they lost several games in a row. And so, I feel like if they do make it, they're going to be down the seating just a little bit. But ironically, the weird part about Logan right now is as much as I've watched them, I guess 3 times now, I still think they're a really good basketball team. I mean, they really have all the weapons, they have all the components, but
So
their first round matchup, who's their first round matchup?
let's assume that they're the 5 seed. So they would probably get Wyoming East, I would think,
Yeah.
because
No, I'm talking about in the postseason.
yeah, yeah.
Their first, they got Charleston Catholic.
Oh yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
I thought you were talking about like potentially a
Yeah. I
tournament.
mean,
Yeah.
that's so, we may be talking, Logan may not even be there,
Mhm.
and if a team like Charleston Catholic does get in there, even though they're the defending state champions, you kind of got to feel like they're going to be down around 7 or 8,
Yeah,
so that
I think
reshuffles
they had
everything.
fallen completely out of the coaches poll, if I'm not mistaken, or
Yeah.
they're pretty close
Right.
to it. And
Yeah.
and that's that and to me, like I said, that's why I like the coaches poll because I think it's a good heat check. Just
Yeah.
kind of looking at Logan's schedule, they played West
It's
Side.
brutal.
Yeah, it is
It's
brutal.
brutal.
Chapmanville,
Yeah.
Williamstown, Wyoming East twice, Tug Valley twice.
Yeah. And all those have A beside them as in away.
Yeah,
They're not playing
Shady.
these two games in Willie Acres.
Yeah, it
So,
yeah, so they're tough either way, and I would imagine that if they get there, I think Williamstown or Wheeling Central in some orders number 1 and 2. They were tied for the AP number 1 earlier today, but
yeah.
those of us that vote in the AP poll, we don't determine the seeds. So
It's all about the
people
coaches.
look at it. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's all up to coaches. I would imagine Williamstown probably gets the 1 if they get there. And I say that because they've won the head-to-head against Wheeling Central, but it was by a point, and it was at Williamstown.
Right.
Uh, I'd probably go Wheeling Central, but either way, you could convince me with either one, and I don't think it would matter.
Right.
Depending on who gets there, James Monroe was number three in the coaches poll. So
Right.
if they get there, the coaches around the state, do they seed them at number three for there, or do they drop them to number four? And if James Monroe isn't there, then I would imagine that West Side, with their schedule and the resume they put together here, beating Shady and Chapmanville and Logan, they're probably looking at that as okay, like we're probably the number three seed, and then I would imagine Wyoming East, if they get there, that they're the four seed. So yeah, I guess it depends on what combination we get. I think either way, West Side probably gets the nod uh,
Right.
over there, but I just don't know because that last coach's poll that came out was before I believe the
Yeah.
Shady game was
I mean,
finalized.
I think it should play out like you said, one or two is a flip flop. How you want to argue that? If West Side wins and gets there, I think they should be the three. The winner of James Monroe, Wyoming East, if they get there, that should be your four. And then after that, you just kind of battle it out a little bit. But imagine if Logan does get upset by uh, Central. I mean Charleston Catholic, and Charleston Catholic's like a 7 or 8 seed. I like one or two getting to play that to start
It,
with.
it's funny because obviously Charleston Catholic, with the injuries and everything and the graduations they had, they're not quite at that level, but they were the team that upset Williamstown a couple years ago.
Yeah,
Whenever Williamstown was, they've
yeah,
been really good the last couple years, but I think they were 10 deep that year and they were a huge favorite to win Double A
yeah.
or have a shot at it. And I
They
think
played a Charleston Catholics played a brutal schedule too. I mean, just almost a ridiculous schedule.
yeah.
It seemed like every night I look up, they're playing a team. I'm like, man, are y'all not going to take a break tonight? I mean, because Hunter don't back up. I mean,
Yeah, he
he is
does.
all gas, no brakes, man.
Absolutely. Do you have any final thoughts on Double A before we kind of move around to some of these other seedings and stories of interest?
I think we've been looking forward to it this time for Double A all year, and
Hmm.
now it's here, and I think it's going to be exactly what we thought it was going to be, a wild and crazy ride. Just buckle up because it's going to be interesting.
If we end up getting that James Monroe at Wyoming East co-regional game,
Oh man, I done told him I was like, y'all better really stock up on security. Let me tell
yeah,
you.
yeah, it could be because those two fan bases can get extremely testy, and there are
Yeah,
already going to be some sore emotions,
right,
into it
exactly. That's
on
right.
either side.
Yeah.
So yeah,
And see, that's where I wonder, just I know James and Rose played in some tough environments, but the Wyoming County kids, they play in this environment since they were in grade school. I mean, that's how it is down there, even in grade school.
go to like a
You know?
Pineville Oceana or Pineville
Yeah.
Baileysville game, like it's like you're thrown back in time where they have, it's a
Right.
middle school game, but they have people against the walls just
Yeah, I mean,
max.
there's no room to. You don't hit the padding underneath the rim. You hit people.
Yeah,
That's what stops you because they're everywhere. I mean, I imagine there'll be TVs set up in the cafeteria. A lot of times that's what happens. To have people watching the games down there because it's big time stuff, and you better get there early if that's the game that gets played. You better get there real early.
absolutely. I want to take a moment to acknowledge one of our sponsors, Princeton Healthcare Center, here over here on Courthouse Road, a commitment to caring. They offer the highest quality care in a senior living environment that is warm, comfortable, and friendly. You can make sure to check them out at phcconline.org. That is once again phcconline.org. Princeton Healthcare Center, a commitment to caring. Again, just a major thank you to our sponsors, Princeton Healthcare Center and Raynell Medical Center, for all their support in the podcast and Play Sheet Sports. I kind of want to move on to some of the other stories. And single A, this is one that's really sticking out to me and kind of flying under the radar, I think, a little bit. In single A, Montcalm, a number two seed, a legit shot to make it to the state tournament. And I think no matter what way you look at it, this is just a really all around pretty unique story. I kind of want to pull up the brackets real quick and kind of take a look at that. But
They're
it,
the
yeah,
two, and Webster's the three, and they just played each other
they beat
a
them.
week or so ago, and
Yeah.
Webster beat them and Montcalm by it was like 5 point game. So, it was a tight game. Of course, really there are no givens in that You know, I mean, I think Greater Beckley is the given. You know, they are the team to beat. You know, but you know, on that other side, I mean, who knows? You know, I mean, you could play that thing 20 times and have 20 different results. So, you know, it's going to be crazy.
Indeed. But I don't think that I'd have to go check, but I'm pretty sure that they've never been to the state tournament
Yeah,
before.
one
One
time,
time?
78, I believe it was. They were state runner up.
78. Let me take a
78.
look at this. I could actually
Yeah.
probably.
Yeah, it. I'm trying to think who the kid was that was the really good player on that team. They had like three that were really good. I mean, and matter of fact, they in the I think it was the regional final, I believe it was. They had to beat Peterstown, and Peterstown had Steve Newberry as a sophomore, I believe, that year
So
that
in
they
the
beat him.
semifinals, they beat Notre Dame 60 to 54,
Yeah,
lost to Hearts 87 to
yeah.
73.
That's when Harts Creek had. I think the kid's name was Scott Fry. He was 6'7", and he had
Mhm.
like 31 points and 20 rebounds that night. I mean, they just ran into an unfortunate situation really because Montcalm was really good. You know, that regional final against Peterstown was a 1 point game. You know, it was different back then. You had to win two regional games to get into the state tournament, and only four teams went to the state tournament at that point in time. So it was interesting. You know, it was. I can't believe I can't remember that kid's name. They had a really good player,
For
and I can't
Montcalm.
think of what his. Yeah, I can't remember what his
Okay,
name
so I'm
was.
looking at the all tournament. Randy Jennings and Randall
Jennings.
Basham.
Yeah, Jennings and Basham were the two big guns for him. So
Jennings is on Facebook, I think, because I've seen somebody with a Montcalm Facebook profile kind of
yeah,
commenting on different things. So
great player.
yeah.
Great player. Yeah.
But yeah, you mentioned that Rick Napier. So there are four kids from Hearts on all tournaments. Scott Fry, Rick Napier. I think in that area they call him Napier, Napper, and Jeff Lambert and Norvin Ramey. But you talked
Yep.
about that Region 3 final, 57, Montcalm 57, Peterstown 56. A lot of Peterstown references in the show today.
Yeah, exactly. It's been crazy. That's what, of course, I've been around forever, but man, Peterstown had some players, dude. I'm telling you, I've seen Steve Newberry up close and personal. You know, I've pitched baseball against him. He hit the hardest baseball I've ever seen off of me.
Uh, I kind of want to move on to AAA because that one is just really interesting now, and I think we've seen it all year where Shady's looked immortal at times, but a lot of teams haven't been able to get them. And then the final week of the season, they went down to Clear Fork. They lost that West Side. I believe that was a tough shooting night, but pretty convincing win for West Side, and that's kind of why we were toting it for them a little bit earlier in the show. And then they lost at Greenbrier East. Just another tough game, and we thought all year long that the Greenbrier East games could be really competitive for them.
Right,
You've seen
right.
them play Greenbrier East, uh, but yeah, if you're Shady, and once you get up there, it's a different environment. But getting out of Region 3 in AAA won't be easy because you even look at it. Herbert Hoover is in that 4 seed matchup, and then the 2-3 Ripley's in it as well and Greenbrier East. So they won't see Greenbrier East again until possibly the state tournament if that were to happen.
Right.
Uh, but it really is interesting projecting Shady down the road at this point and kind of seeing how things unfold for them. I do like their postseason experience, but it's just a really tough path to get through AAA.
Yeah. I think should they make it, I think they're probably going to be the two. I think it'll be Bridgeport. Bridgeport had to win over the second win of the season over Fairmont Senior tonight, and Seniors had a couple big wins here right
Beat
after the
Nitro
loss to
at
Shady.
Nitro.
Yeah, so I think that Shady will be the two, Bridgeport one. I don't know, maybe Fairmont three. Nitro four. I don't know how that's going to play out, but I've had some communication from some people that felt like Hoover should have been the three and Greenbrier East the four. And we talked about this before. I don't think Greenbrier East got quite the recognition they deserved. Because of the brutal schedule that they played. I mean, I'm pretty sure they have 7 losses, and 2 of them are to Beckley, is a top 5 quad A team. 2 of them are to Shady. I mean, one of them's to Shady. One's to Spring Mills. I mean, their losses are not to just
Jumps.
deaf and blind here. I mean, they've lost some tough teams, and really they were in all of those games except the Spring Mills game, of course. But in second half, they played it pretty even with them. But I mean, I tell people Greenbrier East is good, and I think that proved itself when they did wind up winning, against Shady at in Fairleigh. I think they've earned the three. And again, we preface this with we don't know how good Ripley and Hoover really are. I've looked at Hoover's schedule, and it doesn't like jump off the page at you as a brutal schedule. The big games they've had, they've been in those games, but they've not won those games. So they don't have a win to point to say, okay, well, look, they won this game, which, with Greenbrier East, I mean, I know people, probably don't understand how good Princeton is, but they've handled Princeton twice. They beat Shady. I mean, they've got good wins. So, I mean, I felt like, in a maybe in a different world, they're the two seed, because I don't, I've looked at Ripley's games, and those are just really nail biter type games too. So, I mean, I'm interested, to be quite honest, to see how the Ripley Princeton game plays out because of all those athletes that Princeton's got. And,
I think
you know,
it's Ripley and Pikeview, is it not?
I mean, yeah,
Yeah,
Pikeview,
it's
Pikeview,
Hoover
but
and
they would get
yes.
Princeton in probably the second round, possibly second
So
round.
I think Princeton's the five seed. Let me pull it up right here. I do believe, yeah. So Princeton has Herbert Hoover. Now Princeton
Okay.
lost at Hoover by 4 points.
Maybe that's the one I was thinking of was Hoover and Princeton.
I think so because that's the interesting one. And I brought this up, but I went to Pikeview to cover their game against James Monroe on Monday night, and I was talking to Pikeview head coach Les Farmer about it. And I said Princeton, they only lost by 4 up at Herbert Hoover, and Les was like, "Yeah, but the thing that people leave out about that is that Donovan Brown didn't play for Herbert Hoover in that game, and that's about 18 points
That
per
does make a
game.
difference.
Yeah, that makes a huge difference in that game, and
And
that's
that's a lot of things
context.
you don't know too, when
Yeah,
you just look at scores, what the circumstances are, and things like that. So, but I mean, nothing's given in AAA. I mean,
yeah,
even Shady, they're going to have to play the whole way through. And, like we've talked, just talked about, Hoover's going to come down here if they wind up beating Princeton to start with. They're going to come down here with, a chip on their shoulder of like, hey, we got jobbed here, and we're going to show you how good we are. So, we'll see how it plays out. But AAA could go a lot of different ways. Go a lot of different ways.
there's a world where Bridgeport just has one of those Wheeling Central years where they sweep volleyball, they've got basketball, and then they got football, and they've got a chance to
We got a
win
pretty good chance of
basketball.
baseball.
Yeah, now they're in AAA for baseball too, and I know a lot of locally we have some teams with state championship aspirations like Pikeview and Independence, and it's
Right.
dang, like we've got Bridgeport back in AAA again this year. We've got to go through that monster. So yeah, it really is a bit of an interesting just kind of alignment here, and even just this region in particular because if I were a betting man, I would like to think that Greenbrier East and Shady are probably the two teams that come out of the region. If not Greenbrier East, then Ripley. I've not seen Ripley, but I've heard people
Right.
say a lot of good things about them. Uh, but yeah, and even those aren't a given.
Right.
This
Right.
region's been competitive enough that it could be
Yep.
anybody. And then once you get up there, we've seen Fairmont Senior win some close games. Even I think that both of us would agree that when we saw Shady and Fairmont Senior, I didn't really consider Fairmont Senior a title contender, but
Right.
a couple of things, Dave Ritten knows how to coach basketball in the Charleston Coliseum. And
Yep.
we've seen that over the last 10 years, and he's been extremely successful at it. And they've gotten better over the last couple of weeks.
And they definitely have the players. I mean, they don't have the players they've had in the past, but they have some players, and they're physical, and they can get it done. And whenever we see him play his teams at Charleston, they're different teams that we see in the regular season. They're scheming for certain things, they're doing certain things that they didn't do in the regular season, and that's why he's such a great coach.
Absolutely. And they do have 3 starters from last year's state
Right.
running team
Right.
back as well, which I believe is the same amount that Shady has, Jack, Jalen, and Kai. So.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Quad A is probably the last one that I want to hit on real quick. And uh, man, this is we talked about this before, but Woodrow got a really tough draw. Provided to get past Riverside, you have to go to South Charleston, and this one's kind of been set in stone since I would probably go back to since they lost to South Charleston in the Armory. We kind of
Right.
knew at that point, they're probably not avoiding that 3 seed. You're going to have to go on the road and win a regional championship. And it's tough because Woodrow has a legitimate shot at claim at being a top four team in the state in Quad A, and that's just a really tough route to do. And I think they can do it. But South Charleston, in a lot of ways, is a bad matchup for them because of how long and how tall they are. They give Beckley some fits. We talk about Jalen Walton being a very good center in the middle and just kind of dominating him. But he's not like a super tall or long center.
Right.
I'd say he's probably about 6'1", 6'2", realistically, even though a lot of people are probably going to say, hey, we got a 6'4", 6'5" center.
Right.
I'm 6'1". I know when you're lying about your height. You know,
Exactly.
and so I think that he's a great big man. He's a great center, but South Charleston has the attributes that would give a player like him some issues.
Yeah.
So I think if Beckley's able to get to that point and play South Charleston, it could be it's a tough game to get there, but they're accustomed to that and they don't really run from challenges at all. So it's just another step on the road for them. But here's the thing about the postseason: if you want to win a state championship, you're going to have to win hard games.
Yeah. Well, and we've talked before about Beckley and South Charleston. It just seems like the faces and the names change, but everything kind of stays the same when those two play. I mean, you go all the way back to the 90s, when Beckley had their big runs. I mean, a lot of times, they didn't beat South Charleston in the title game, but they had them in either the quarterfinal or the semifinal games in some huge matchups. So these two teams have banged heads in the postseason for a long, long time. Beckley has typically struggled, in the South Charleston Community Center. But really, this game, I don't think there's a lot of secrets in this game. Beckley has got to shoot the ball well, especially from the outside to kind of open up the inside a little bit, because even though Jalen's not really tall, I think he's got the quick post moves that he can, score effectively as long as there's not a lot of traffic down there. So they've got to score the basketball well from the 3-point line. They've got to rebound. I mean, that just flat out, they have got to team rebound,
Hmm.
because that's where South Charleston kills you. And it kind of killed Beckley a little bit in the first matchup. I mean, I've always kind of joked that they just throw it up and run and get it. It's a lot like the old Capital teams used to do. They could shoot 1 for 15 from the 3-point line because they'd run and grab the rebound and put it in for a bucket. So Beckley has got to team rebound and limit their shots. If they limit their shots, then South Charleston gets tight and they will struggle shooting the basketball. So, it's not a secret. The game plan's pretty simple. You just boils down to execution. Which team's going to execute the best that night, and I look for it to be another one or two possession right at the end of the game type deal.
I think key for Beckley, and then again, that's provided they get past Riverside, is can you get Kobe Dillon going into that game? Because
Yep.
Kobe's a great basketball player, but he is a little bit on the smaller side.
Yep.
He's the kind of kid that with South Charleston's length, it could give him some problems.
Yep.
Can you get some sets for him to get him some good open looks to where not everything is contested, or he has a 6'5" kid running at him as he's trying to get set for a shot. If you can get him up, it kind of plays into what you just said, kind of open it up a little bit all around and get Jalen some of those looks and let them go from there.
It'll be
I
fun. It'll be a
Yeah,
good game.
absolutely. Before I wrap this up, this is the last episode we'll do before the girls' state tournament gets set, and I don't know if we'll get another episode in before we finish with or before we even get to do the boys' state tournament because I'll be up in Charleston all of next week. But I do want to ask you, you've been around you've seen probably 40 years worth of state tournaments, just, had an opportunity to watch a lot of these. I- and this is extremely hard question. So this is why I'm going to give you a bit of a broad swath, but what are the five state tournament games that you just really remember the most that just really stick out to you? And I'm gonna take away two of them. I'm gonna take away the Beckley Brook game because I feel like that's an easy one. I'm gonna take away the Beckley DuPont game because I've heard those stories and,
Right. Right.
and I know that
Well,
those are easy ones. And
you saw the one I posted, the Independence Tug Valley game,
mhm,
in the AA semifinals, 2000.
mhm.
Just an incredible night. Independence, as they say, had an Ice Cube's chance in Hades of winning that game in most people's mind. Greg Davis at Tug Valley had pretty much locked up Player of the Year. that year. He had made a tournament record 8 threes 2 nights before, and just a demolition of Wyoming East. And basically the trophy was already handed to him. And they put Josh Allen on him and slowed him down. I think he was like 1 for 13 shooting that night. He really struggled, and they had a kid named Timmy Sloan, I believe it was. It was a really good basketball player, really good slasher that could hit the angles and get to the rim. Well, they schemed to get him in foul trouble with charges, and he got 2 early fouls, spent the whole night in foul trouble. I think he only scored 5 points, and they limited just an absolute electric Tug Valley team to, I think, it was 50 some points. So that was, I mean, the magnitude of that upset is, I don't even think it's close. I mean, that's one of the biggest upsets I've seen in state tournament history. Man, you really kind of put me on the spot a little bit, but definitely the Herndon Peterstown game. That was another game that, when you looked at Little Herndon, they had really no size whatsoever. And, Peterstown had all those athletes and had big 6'7" kid inside that, was going D1. So, you just like, well, this is going to be a 40-point blowout. And by some miracle, they pull it out. And this is going to kind of kill the Wyoming County folks a little bit, but I think it was the year that Oak Hill beat Wyoming East, and I think East had already won 2 in a row, I believe it was, and was looking to be a third, and they beat Oak Hill like 3 times that season. And Oak Hill, came back and wound up beating them late in the game. Jack Flournoy had a huge steal and dunk that seemed to kind of flip the game, and Oak Hill upset them that night. So, that one was really big. Um, wow, I don't know. I'm trying to think some of the Wyoming East games. They were always pretty
So they played
exciting. But
Poca in double overtime, Camp McBride senior.
yeah, that one. Well, and there was a Beckley game where they lost to Wheeling Park. They had, I think, a Cruz kid.
95, I think.
Yeah, it was like
Double overtime.
triple overtime or double overtime, and Dave, Coach Barksdale was in the bleachers because he had gotten a technical the game before, and this weird Raleigh County rule had if he got X amount of technicals, he was suspended. Well, he
Which
got
he said was
suspended.
put in place specifically for him because I had a chance
Exactly.
to do a couple stories with him on some of these games that they played in the history of the state tournament, and he was like, this was put in because I don't want to misspeak, but there was somebody in the administration higher in the board that thought there was too much emphasis put on basketball or
Right,
something like
right.
that, and basically it was put in as a deterrent to kind of spite
Yeah.
Barksdale.
And the semifinal game in '90 when Beckley beat Logan, was just an unbelievable game. I mean that, Logan had they'd played these wild games during the season, in the hundreds. I mean, it was when basketball was scoring was big time back then, because you couldn't play physical like you could now. You had to play some legitimate defense, and I think it was Kevin Staples, one of the Staples, the Bartram kid from Logan who was going to Penn State, came in and drove the lane early in the game, and he pinned it on the glass, and it just like changed everything in the whole place. And Beckley went on to kind of pound them pretty good that night, and that to me that was kind of the kickoff of the '90 dominance of Beckley was that game. Yeah. I mean that was the booster, because I mean, granted they still had to go beat Martinsburg, but it was a shocker, I mean that not necessarily that Beckley won, but that Beckley really pounded them like they did. And when you talk about Beckley Logan, that was some of the premier time for Beckley and Logan, because that was a time that Beckley couldn't beat Logan at Logan. Logan was just almost unbeatable in Willie Acres Arena at that time. So, I'd say those are definitely, up in the top 10. If I stood and sit and thought about it for a while, there's just so many games. I mean, that's just so many electric games that, buzzer beaters and, great players and different things that you've seen throughout the years. And sometimes you forget about it, and I was just kind of pillaging through some of that stuff, just the Montcalm thing, those guys. I mean, Mark Klein and the kid from Princeton,
Jimmy Miller.
Jimmy Miller. Yeah, went to Virginia. They had a classic battle down there, and that's all through the '80s. There was the Wheeling Central Williamson battles. Williamson had a huge string of wins. As far as state tournaments go and stuff. So there's just so many games, and that's why a lot of times when you hear all these old guys talk about what it used to be like, I mean, that's this, that night that Beckley beat South Charleston in the first session, and Logan played somebody in the night session because it used to be on Fridays. The AAA game was at 5:30 and 9,
Hmm.
and they would flip flop the AA and single A in the middle. But those AAA games were monster games, and it was crowds of 12 and 13,000 people. I mean, they were just
There were
jam
a lot
packed
of
in
huge
that place.
prospects. Like you talked about Bartram, but I think it was 2 years later whenever Beckley won. I think they were probably the underdogs when they played Fairmont Senior, but Prickett, Jared Prickett,
Right,
I think
right.
was it Kentucky or was it
Yeah.
Penn? Yeah.
Yeah, and see that's another one, because that was Fairmont pretty sure was undefeated. They beat Beckley early in the year, and Fairmont was just mowing through people right and left, and that was when Shea Fleener actually dunked on Prickett because that was the big chant all through the crowd.
Yeah.
You
I
know,
think somebody painted it on a building up on Maxwell Hill is what Barksdale
yeah,
told me. And I've seen
yeah,
pictures of it before. I think Rick Barbero, the photographer's register held actually
yeah.
had taken pictures of it. And,
Yeah.
we're
So I
almost,
mean
yeah.
that's just so many games. I mean, even just when you start going back, sometimes you forget the games in the '70s. The Norfolk teams. How many good Norfolk teams were down there, and even though Norfolk was dominant. And they ran off that big string. It wasn't that they walked into Charleston and won those games by 40 points. I mean, those were tough games. They were tight games, and there were some really good teams down there. And it just sometimes the semifinal games get forgotten because of the finals, and that's only kind of what's I guess noted in the books and stuff. But man, some of them semifinal Friday night at the state tournament, semifinal Friday was just everybody was like a kid on Christmas, man. They were just like, here we go. I mean, it's going to be a blast. And it always was from start to finish, just crazy games.
We should have done just like the whole podcast on like ranking like the top 10 state tour. I might actually try if I had time, I'd probably look into doing something like that because there'd just be so many people that had a ton of different opinions on
Oh,
this.
no doubt. No doubt.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I obviously my tenure is I've covered 7 or 8 of these and that's it. But the ones I look at, the one I cannot get out of my mind is the state tournament 2021 on the boys' side, the Wednesday. In the last game of the first session, Fairmont Senior falls to Winfield. And in the first game of the second session, the first 1-8 seed upset where
Yeah.
Hampshire, first time making the state tournament. Shout
Yeah.
out to Philip C., our mutual friend who had written about this in his book that he hoped to one day see Hampshire in the
Yeah.
state tournament. And then they get there for the first time and they upset the 1 seed. They make history. And it clears the path for Shady Spring. And then, not to be outdone, later that night, Wheeling Central beats Nitro on a 3-pointer at the buzzer in I think it was the 4-5 game.
Yep.
And yeah, this is
There was
incredible.
one year I think in Double A, like in 2002 or 2003, where just about every top seed in Double A lost. I mean, the tournament just went kind of flipped on its edge, in one day. And I'm pretty sure that's the year Oak Hill won, because they beat Independence, and then all these upsets happened all day, and it just like the teams that people were thinking was going to win got beat, and so it was crazy. I mean, it was you just seen some crazy stuff down there, and that's why they say that's why you play the game. You just never know, never know.
Absolutely. And I mean, and I feel like the good thing about it is there are always new chapters written in it. You can even go back to championship Saturday last year.
Oh yeah,
2 seeds won across the board and they were all 3-point games.
yeah,
One that won in overtime. I'm not sure. And, I hope I'm wrong just because it's great for entertainment value, but I'm not sure that we'll ever see a championship Saturday like that again, where
right,
every game came down to the last possession and
yep.
you get all the 2 seeds to win. And it started out great, obviously. Shady Spring winning in overtime and the great storyline there, beating
Kind of
Fair.
a shocker. I mean, a lot of people gave Fairmont the edge there, and I mean that, and you could just do a little storyline on the 3 years of Fairmont Shady games.
Mhm. Yeah,
All three of those games were just unbelievable games.
absolutely. And then on the girls' side, we were both there, but going back to that Williamstown Wyoming East game last year, that was insane. And then
Yeah,
Nitro winning over Fairmont Senior the year Bailey Goins got hurt in the title game.
right,
Uh,
right.
yeah, it's crazy. I just love this time of year because there's such a reverence for us. Like this is the Super Bowl of our state.
Oh yeah,
At the
yeah,
time, people plan their vacations around it. I
yeah.
remember talking to JB Miller, the AD at Richwood last year during track season, and he said we did things a little bit differently because hotels are just asking for an arm and a leg. But
Yeah.
you talk about it, there are so many families, so many coaches that are, when the year starts, this is their vacation. They take a week off from school and teaching, and they're
Right,
down
yeah,
there all week, just watching basketball games, and you get to see all these coaches from all across the state, whether you're eating at some of the local restaurants or walking around, the what's left of the town center at this point. It really is just an incredible time
yeah.
of year, and it's man,
That was
even from the
that was
professional
crazy too.
standpoint.
Just how busy the town center was when you would go over there, between sessions, and there was nowhere that you couldn't find anywhere to sit to eat. It was just packed in there, and people milling around, all the shirts, the different haircuts. It was a special time. It was really a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I hope that one day we'll kind of get back to that. I'm not sure if we ever will. I'm just kind of looking at the story I brought up from that Logan Beckley game you mentioned in '90. A record crowd of
Yeah,
13,335.
unbelievable.
Yeah, and
Well, and that DuPont
Beckley
Beckley
game.
game, they
Yeah.
were out scalping tickets outside for in the hundreds. I mean, these are probably at that time were the most $10 tickets. Maybe not that at that point, and they're out there scalping them like crazy. It was packed. I mean, there was the legislators were in the building. I mean, everybody wanted to see that game, and it. I can still remember the opening tip with Moss, and I can remember the last pass that just kind of went out of bounds. Beckley had a chance. I can't remember if they had a chance if it was for a tie or to go ahead, but it was the pass that went out of bounds and kind of sealed Beckley's fate a little bit. It's crazy. It was a good game. It was a great game. It's interesting because, like you just said, there was they didn't have seating back then,
Hmm.
so it was like 11:15 on. Pretty sure the tournament used to start on Wednesday. 11:15 on a Wednesday, and that place is jammed to the rafters, and people standing all over the place. So, it definitely would have been the one versus two, and it's a shame it didn't wind up on a Saturday night at the state tournament. But it was a weird year because I don't know if of course, Martinsburg had a really good team that year. It wasn't like they were given the title, but everybody was convinced it was Beckley and DuPont that year.
Yeah, it's I talked to Bark Sale about it, and he said that they were eating breakfast at Shoney's that morning, and somebody came in the door and they were like, "If you're looking for a ticket to Beckley DuPont, don't worry about it. They are sold out."
That's
And he was
right.
just kind of like, "Wow."
Yeah,
Yeah, and he
yeah,
said that he actually thought Martinsburg would win because he was listening to the radio, and I think during a timeout, Randy Moss and Jason Williams were signing autographs behind the bench,
yeah.
and it was mentioned on the broadcast. And he said at that point, I just kind of knew. But yeah,
Lost the focus.
you
Lost
can
the
find a
focus.
lot of those
Yeah,
games still on YouTube now. So yeah,
yeah.
well, I think that'll about do it. Do you have any final thoughts before we wrap this thing up?
Now let's just hope for another wild, couple weeks, just to see some craziness.
Yeah, absolutely, and settle down. Well, my name is Tyler Jackson, and once again, I want to thank our sponsors of this week's episode. That's Princeton Healthcare Center and Raynell Medical Center. Obviously, we couldn't do this without them, and just again, I just want to express our gratitude for everything that they've done as we started the Play Sheet Sports podcast and this whole platform. But for my co-host and our guest, Rusty Hewdy, I'm Tyler Jackson, and we'll see you next week.